Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for coming. I'm Molly Starback, Director of the Office of Postdoctoral Services, and I'd like to welcome you to the first panel discussion in our series on the academic job search. So this series is co-sponsored by my office, the Duke Career Center and Graduate School. Upcoming events in the series include the academic interview that's coming up next, negotiating the job offer, creating a teaching statement. I think we just had the diversity statement this week. Did anybody go to that?
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yeah, it's already been. Thank you, Victor. And we're going to have a special session on successfully negotiating job offers for female graduate students and postdocs. So sometimes, if you're a graduate student, you can go to the graduate school website. If you're a postdoc, you can go to the postdoc website, or you'll be getting emails about that. So today's discussion is on the initial search process. So your CV, your cover letter, your research, teaching statements, your letters of recommendation. Many of you submitted your questions in advance, so thank you for doing that. We'll start with those and then open the floor to questions from the audience. And if we have time at the end, we'll stop a little bit early so you can come down and network with our speakers and ask them your personal questions. So now I would like to sincerely thank our panelists for taking time out of their busy. This is the busiest time of the year, as you probably know, so we really owe them a vote of thanks for joining us today. Our panelists are Allison Ashley Koch, who is professor of the Duke Molecular Physiology Institute and Department of Medicine and the Department of Biostatistics and Bioinformatics. Dennis Coe, assistant professor of molecular genetics and microbiology. Jonathan Benetti, assistant professor of biomedical engineering, and John Willis, professor of biology. So I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves and briefly talk about how they've been involved in searches, or for those who are relatively new, what it was like for them, and then we'll start with the questions that were submitted. So Allison, would you like to start?
Sure. So I'm a genetic epidemiologist by training. Most of my work sort of focuses on finding human genetic variants for various phenotypes and then doing functional annotation with chickens and zebrafish. So, you know, full disclosure, I actually have not formally been kind of a member of a search committee. You know, I've been on the periphery, but of course I've been here for a while, so I've interacted a lot with various different candidates and been involved with some of those discussions. I should also say, I mean, I've been involved personally myself, kind of on the interview side a couple of times, so I can bring that experience as well.
So I'm Dennis. I've been here at Duke since 2012. I study human genetic diversity and infectious disease. So I guess we're kind of human genetics heavy on this panel a little bit. I'll just briefly tell you about my search experience. I applied for about a dozen jobs 2010 on the West Coast. I got no interviews, no responses. The next year I had a K award and I applied for 50, 60 positions, interviewed at 6 and the one here at Duke. And I've also served on a search committee. In MGM we've had searches nearly every year since I've been here. Hired about 7 or so faculty since I started. I was on the search committee a few years ago. That search hired Nick Heaton, who's a flu virologist. So you know, I've seen it from both trying to get interviews and trying to get a job, as well as evaluating applications and
I'm John Benetti. I've been involved in searches a few times. I initially applied for my first faculty position back in 2011. Applied about a dozen places, and then eventually started my lab at NYU in electrical engineering, and then was recruited to move here 5 years ago. And so I've been part of search committees at NYU, not at Duke, but I've been on the interviewing side a couple of times now. So thanks. And my research works on implantable devices for the brain.
Say that again?
Implantable devices for the brain.
Holy smokes. So I'm John Willis. Unlike the other three panelists, I'm actually in arts and sciences. so I could talk about that. I'm in the biology department, and we teach all the undergraduates biology, and we also, of course, do research. And I'm a population geneticist, evolutionary genomics, working on plants, but I teach like 400 undergraduates human diversity, human genetic diversity, and association mapping, and all of that kind of stuff too. So yeah, so I've been around for a long time. I was first assistant professor in 1993 at University of Oregon, and then I moved here in 2000, and so I've been here almost 20 years. I've been on a bajillion searches, yeah, so I could tell you a little bit about what we look for, what we are excited by in applications. But I also wanted to make a plug for Duke Kunshan University. I don't know how many of you know about this, but it's Duke's brand new liberal arts university in Kunshan, China. And they are looking for really good biologists, molecular biologists, people who are interested in teaching, but also would be interested in having a research program as well. There are a lot of job openings, and we really need very good people to teach a whole range of subjects. It's very interdisciplinary. You'd be working with scientists in all fields to create curriculum and to teach really amazing students. So I encourage all of you to think about that as a possible career path. It's a little bit different from the traditional research paths, but it's also very exciting. So I just wanted to give a plug for that. DKU. Apply early and often.
Thank you. So on that note, can you talk a little bit about how the search committees are set up, how they're structured?
Me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, anyone.
Well, I think it really depends on the department and the program. Many searches at Duke are interdisciplinary and often span multiple hiring units, multiple departments. And so typically, for those kind of searches, it would involve folks from different departments, different areas of expertise. And so to sort of find people who would be good fits for this interdisciplinary program. In other searches, it's a more narrowly circumscribed search. So it really depends. You want to read the description of the job very carefully to try to find out if it's something that's narrowly within a given department or program, or if it is something broader, and try to address your application accordingly. But it usually has several people on it, both senior and junior faculty and graduate students ideally.
I'll just add a little bit to go on what John was saying about some are more narrow, and so the one that I was involved with MGM was a narrower search, right? So we had, I think, 6 people from the department and then 2 from other departments who evaluated around 150 or so applications. There are 2 chairs who evaluated all of them and ranked sort of like the top 10. And then the rest of us evaluated all of them, but not as in depth. We were able to pull up some ones that we thought, okay, I think this person deserves another look and that sort of thing. On the other hand, I've interviewed for ones that were sort of, I was hired by one that was 3 different entities here at Duke. And there, it's really important to know, okay, who are the stakeholders in this, and can you appeal to all of them? So I had this disastrous interview at UC Berkeley where it was both their basic molecular cell biology program as well as their biostatistics and computational biology program. And I won't go into too much of the details, other than that afterwards I was like, I'm quitting science. This was horrendous. But I had a really hard time appealing to the computational biology people, and they, I use computational tools, but I wouldn't consider myself like a biostatistician or anything like that. And I got questions about, you used this in figure 7 of this paper a couple years ago. Can you explain your Bayesian model for that. It's like, I don't even remember what the model was. I used someone's program, right? But right. So I think there I could have probably prepared better, knowing that, yeah, they're probably going to want to know about that, even though I don't really remember what I did. But I could have probably like brushed up on those sorts of things beforehand, right? So yeah.
On the job ads, if you take a look at them, sometimes they're written with a specific area in mind. You'll see there's a focus, there's a goal, search from the search committee. Often, other times, you'll see these you might see a very generic job posting that just covers all areas of, say, biomedical engineering, like in our department. That sort of, sometimes we'll just write catch-all job ads where we're just looking for great people in any area, any sub-discipline. So sometimes you'll have searches that are really broad that will try to pick up anyone, and then you should just apply, even when sometimes they're very narrow and not a specific area. And if you can reasonably make a case that you fit into that area, you might as well apply. There's usually not much downside to applying, even if you're way outside. Someone will take a look, but you don't usually need to tailor your application so carefully to fit the specific job posting. Usually the job postings have maybe not so much a discrete focus when they're crafted.
Thank you. So candidates are typically asked to submit CV, cover letter, research statement, teaching statement, possibly diversity statement, and get letters of reference. So out of all of those things, how would you rank them? What are the most important things that you tend to look at?
I mean, I think in some way they're all important, right? I mean, sort of, I would say, and you guys chime in, the first pass, probably CV and research statements really are kind of the most important for kind of grabbing people's attention, right? They want to know, how successful has this candidate been, up to this point in their career? What is their kind of broad research focus? And then after that point, some of these other details start kind of whittling away and helping you rank, as Dennis said, various different candidates,
Yeah, I think CV, probably the first thing people look at. You want to get people's attention quickly, make sure it's easy to find. Your awards, fellowships, and papers, grants, get them up front, get them easy to find, make that stuff highlighted so it's easy to find. And then next thing's probably the research statement. I'd like to put as much detail as possible in the research statement, making it feel kind of like a grant application, where it's maybe 6 pages or so. But it's a little bigger than a grant application. It's not one specific project, it's what you think you're going to do in your lab for the first 7-ish years or so. So you're trying to lay out a grand vision, but also have some details about how you're going to accomplish each of your main thrusts. And then sort of teaching statement, I think we sort of look at, okay, yes, they've taught something, or they have some teaching experience, or have TA'd something. And then, yeah, so it's really kind of increasing order of importance, I think.
Yeah, I think you kind of need to either, in order to get past that first thing, you either, I think the CV is the most important for the first pass, right? You either need to have some high-profile publications or publications that show continued vision that can lead to more publications, or a K-award or some other form of funding, I'd say, having those two things are very helpful. Without those two things, I'd say there should be something where they feel like, oh, this is a really good fit for our department that you would highlight in the cover letter. So, right, if you had, so for most of mine, I really did tailor it to every single job ad that was out there. And I had some paragraph that was like, my approach of human genetic diversity is very applicable, and in particular, I'm interested in these things. And I wouldn't like call out people in the department by name, but I would just list stuff that I knew that department cared about. Like, oh, this department is really strong in fungal pathogenesis. So I'm going to list that, okay, I could apply this to different fungal pathogens. So anyone on the committee who reads that, who's in that, is like, oh, I could probably collaborate with this guy, even though he doesn't have the strongest publication record. I see this other strength that would work well with the department.
The other piece, just so we kind of hit all different interests, are folks who are interested in teaching positions, right? Because some of you guys, may be interested in kind of pursuing teaching as kind of your primary focus, and then in that situation, your teaching statement becomes much more heavily weighted than your research statement, right? We want to sort of see that you've thought about curriculum development, you've had opportunities to teach, to mentor, things like that, right, John?
Yeah,
You can
absolutely. In our department, we haven't really had people apply for strictly teaching positions or even mainly teaching positions, but what we're often looking for in the teaching statement is a connection to research. And that would be true even if you were going to a primarily teaching institution, because what is very valuable as a science teacher is that you know the field, you're up on the latest stuff. You're not going to be teaching from an old musty textbook that is like a dozen years or 20 years out of date, and you're just going to be following along chapter by chapter. Instead, you've got your own view of the field, of what's really going on, what's the most important stuff for students to know. And so, have that kind of stuff in your teaching statement, in addition to the stuff like, oh, I love lecturing, I'm super great at a seminar, and whatever. But just really emphasize that tie-in to current science, and that you're going to be teaching sort of cutting-edge stuff because of your own background and your own expertise. I think that's something that's really good. The other thing I would emphasize, several of the points that were just made. Number one, if you noticed, I think you were saying that it was focusing on the first 7 years, or which of you was the first 7 years? A lot of sort of first drafts of research statements that I see from grad students or postdocs in my lab or other labs, they very much focus on what they've already done. Like, I did this, and I discovered this, and it was so exciting, and look, science. Or look, I got it in a magazine, or something like that. And it's, that's all great, and that's gonna, a good track record is very important, but that what they're gonna be looking at, especially if they invite you for an interview, is what you're gonna do now, and what you're gonna do in the future, and how you're gonna build on that, and how your trajectory is gonna go like that, right? So, they want to see that you are driven, you are question-oriented, you're passionate about discovering something important. You're not like checking off boxes with routine kind of run-of-the-mill science. And so I think that's what, your vision, your passion, your originality, your creativity, all of that stuff, you want to somehow package into this view of what you're going to be doing going forward. I think that's a really key thing in the research statement. All too often you just see a big, long research statement that summarizes your life so far, and then there's a little bit at the end, oh, I want to do more of the same in the future, and that's just not good.
So one question, actually two questions that come up over. Oh, sorry.
Couple of.
So what proportion would you recommend being, previous stuff you've done versus future goals?
Well, I don't know a real number, but if you think about organizing the thing, and you might have several different projects or several different things, you want to ask yourself now, are all of these topics that I have been working on, are they all things that I'm going to carry forward, or am I going to carry forward on just one or two things and then expand? And so I think that kind of dictates how you organize it. If you've got like 3 projects and you're going to be following up on all of them, you could have it organized so that at the very beginning you tell the gentle reader that this is the way I'm structuring it, because I'm going to be, so I'm going to first summarize what I've done, and then I'm going to say what I want to be doing. You could have little subheadings. You know, headings are good things. So, you know, just guide the gentle reader along. If you have a completely new future thing, then summarize your thing and label it previous research, blah, 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 and then future goals. And yeah, so maybe 2/3 past, 1/3 future, or whatever. But make it really clear. And really try to convey your passion and the urgency of solving these problems that you're setting out to do. You know, why it's important, why we need to know this now, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this isn't an NIH grant, so you can have more white space, you can have wider margins. You can
have figures, you can have photographs.
Yes.
Cat videos.
Yeah, and right, they'll see your productivity on your CV, but what they won't see there is like, okay, what is the importance of what you've done? What is the importance of what you've accomplished? So I think it's important to lay that out, and also how that serves as a springboard for what you're going to do for the next several years after that.
All right, so 2 questions that come up over and over again. One is, how many publications? Like, how many publications do you have to have? What tier of journal? And the second one is, do you have to have a history of grant funding? Those are big 2.
Yeah, so in our department, I think what's really important that Joan pointed out is vision, right? So we've hired multiple people, including myself, who have 1 postdoc, first author postdoc publication. Our newest hire, Claire Smith, 1 publication. And for both of us, neither of those publications are in Cell, Nature, or Science, right? But the key is that in our research statement, it's like, okay, here's this publication in some journal that no one here has heard of, but it's super exciting and it's foundational for all this other work that's going to go forward, right? So then that's really what got us in the door. For me, again, it helped that I had the K award. Claire, who's our newest hire, I don't believe she has a grant right now, but it's clear that she's on this super trajectory where people in infectious disease, multiple different subdisciplines of infectious disease, are super excited about the work she's doing. Right, so it's just key to have that vision come forward, and you can make up for fewer publications by having that.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say something about funding, but just to follow up on you don't necessarily have to have a K award, and having a graduate fellowship or a postgraduate fellowship, an F31, an F32, NSF fellowship, any foundation fellowship, really anything that demonstrates that you're able to successfully compete for independent funding based on your record is evidence that you're able to get funding. So really we've seen that in research communities that really anything can count there. So look around, look broadly, look at foundations, look at the federal support, look for any kind of fellowships you can apply for that will help. Even if they're not big, even for only 1 year, that's something.
I mean, one of the points I was going to make, some of your framing depends on what sort of position you're applying for, right? Because, if like some of the MGM hires have sort of been very narrow and very specific, and then, you may not be a Cell, Nature, Science paper, but it could be, a particularly strong paper in that particular field, like American Journal of Human Genetics or something like that. But my point being, if it's a bit of a more narrow search, it's probably not as incumbent upon you to sort of have to tell people, this is a pretty impactful journal in my field, because probably most of the folks on the search committee will know that. I think if you're applying to one of those really broader calls that John mentioned, then your job is a little bit harder, right? Because, you may have to submit interdisciplinary folks on the committee and so forth. So then the framing too becomes a little more important to say, this was particularly important in this particular field. So some of it I think is context.
Yeah, I would try to avoid, well, it's probably too late at this point, but I've definitely seen in some searches, so, there's lots of different fields in the biology department. So, ecology, for example. I've seen applications where there are dozens and dozens of papers, and they're in journals like the American Midland Naturalist or the Auk, and they're things like unusual observations of chickadees after December 30th or whatever. It's like little tiny notes that are just more like, today at my bird feeder I saw, and a lot of people think that, oh wow, I've got a really good CV because I've got a bajillion of these papers, and the bean counters are going to love me. And most universities are not going to, in fact it's going to be a huge turnoff. So the main thing is, I don't think, as you were saying, low publication rate is not necessarily a bad thing at all if you can frame it in terms of this is foundational, this is key to moving forward, this is establishing my credentials in this very tough field, and now I'm, so the whole thing, I think that what we're saying over and over again is search committees are looking for the potential for a strong upward trajectory. That phrase, trajectory, is used over and over again by deans and provosts and APT committees. They use the word trajectory in every single letter. Like, we are, enthusiastic about the strong upward trajectory of the research program of this candidate, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, try to think of yourself as being on a strong upward trajectory.
Yeah, actually, one of the notes that here is the vision in the research statement. But how do you, for example, you don't want to build your future on the work that you did in the previous groups. Sometimes you want to avoid competing with your previous groups. So, but on the other hand, it might be difficult to build your vision if it's too far away from what you have done before. So how do you gauge that how to build that in your research statement so that it can be convincing at the same time you try to avoid competing with your previous group?
So it sounds like that's something that you would want to address before you even get to applying for jobs. Work that out with your PI and figure out what you can and can't take with you, and sort of do a lot of thinking about what you want to do in your own lab long before you apply for jobs, if you can. And then try to gain skills, expertise, whatever, by maybe contacting other labs and beginning to, I don't know, it depends very much on your own field, but it's kind of hard to portray that future direction if it isn't based on something concrete. So I think if you can come up with something concrete that you definitely can take and build on and sort of have it a bit established before you go on the job market, that would be the ideal situation. I think it is really tough when you're doing exciting work in a postdoc, but your hands are completely tied and you cannot do any of that in your future research. You need your PI to help you get something that will be your own so that you can succeed once you're out of there. And that's partly your PI's responsibility, right? I mean, they didn't hire you just as a technician. They hired you as a future scientist because they are committed to writing letters of recommendation and all of that. So you need to get them to help you carve out a future direction. And if they won't do it, maybe switch postdocs or something like that.
I mean, from my perspective, kind of one of the ways to start that discussion is to start drafting sort of what you see as your research statement and your vision and so forth. You know, and that can be a tool by which, you know, you have that conversation with your mentor and also solicit feedback, right? Because, so one of the other things I do is sit on APT and, you know, over and over again. One
Trajectory, right?
Yes, it is trajectory, but not only that, but just that, especially that sort of first promotion and so forth, sometimes it's pretty clear who's had conversations and reviews and, you know, a lot of input, you know, on their research statement versus folks that really have not had much feedback or editing and that kind of stuff. So I think using that research statement as a springboard for those discussions sort of helps you carve out that vision, and also, you know, is very useful in terms of really structuring that research statement.
Yeah, you would kind of want a project in your research strategy that really builds on your previous work, that sort of seems so that, you know, people you're interviewing with can say, oh yeah, that's the next logical step. Like, oh, you've done this, now the next thing you're going to do is going to be great because you know how to do X. And so you want to be able to build on that while leaving room for your advisor. They have to do some things too, so you have to figure out a reasonable split that works for both of you.
And you know, sometimes I've seen lots of cases where folks go to a postdoc to learn a new technique in a system they're not going to pursue, but they come back to their dissertation work now with these new abilities, and you know, they had just left off that at a really you know, enticing point, and now they come back to it, and you know, they're able to move forward now with their postdoc experience. So it's not the case that you necessarily have to see your future career building off your postdoc. It could be, you know, your undergrad, your graduate work, whatever it is, and or even some new collaboration with a buddy of yours who has started a new project somewhere else, and you're, you know, going to join them in a collaborative effort. I mean, that could be the start of something big also. But you just need to sort it out, and like I said, it has to be real. It can't be just like something you're imagining you're going to do. It has to be based on something that, you know, you can show you have ownership over, you have agency and all of that.
I think that, right, they like it in the research statement. I've liked in the research statement, and how I structured mine was, it was largely a project that came right out of the postdoctoral research that I had the publication on. It was, you know, applied to a slightly different system. And that I developed that idea, and then at the end of that there was another section that said, okay, so we're going to do this. This could be an R01 application, and beyond that, you know, I see this larger vision of us applying this to other pathogens, and so they want to see that, okay, this person can get an R01 or NSF grant or something fairly soon within the first few years, but that's not going to be the end of it, right? They're going to continue to grow this, and they can see it continuing to have that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, they want to see, oh, this is an easy, no-brainer R01 or big NSF, right? After
Exists.
Yeah, I know, of course. It used to be, but no longer. But there's all of this future potential beyond that initial funding.
So you were talking about materials more. None of you mentioned reference letters. So where do reference letters come into play? At what point are they important? How does that come into play?
I mean, I'd say that they're important for helping you validate that your opinion that you come up with from the rest of the application. Because you know that the reference letters are going to be heavily influenced by the writer. And so, for example, we know that there's this one person who has very good people come out of his lab, but he says everyone is the best thing since, like, Isaac Newton, right? So that can't be true about everyone who comes out of his lab, right? But he'll, explain why he thinks that is the case. So, you have to take them with a grain of salt, but they can really, if you get multiple letters that say, okay, this person is super creative, despite their, only having one major publication at this step, he is currently working on these things and all will lead. So they can help explain, certain deficiencies in your application, which may make the reviewer view it a little bit differently, I'd say.
Yeah, another thing is if you've helped your advisor write a grant, say, that is under their name, but you contributed a lot to it, that's something that's kind of awkward to put in your CV. It's not really obvious like how you put that in there because it's not your own grant. But that's something that your letter writer could really emphasize, and you could remind them to include it. One thing I think that APT and search committees, at least here at Duke, and I assume other places, there's a lot. I would say that in the past, reference letters were really probably the most important thing. Because there was a lot of like, oh wow, this person is coming from this rock star's lab, and so it must be a rock star. But of course, there's so much bias, there's so much sort of anti-diversity thing that can happen because of that old boy network kind of thing, that I think we're all sort of waking up to the realization that which lab you come from and what they say about you may say more about who you are in terms of whether you're male or female or whatever your background is. And so we're, I think, more cautious about, I mean, wouldn't you say a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think one of the things we haven't started discussing yet up to this point is, what happens kind of once you get an interview, right? Because a lot of what we've just been discussing is kind of making that sort of first cut. And I think John is right. I think, thankfully things have changed, over the
or they're
past.
changing.
Yes, right. There are some sort of more active appreciations for, taking a little bit of a different look. And I think we were talking about the reference letters. I mean, I think everything that was said really is true. We have to assume, if you ask someone to write you a reference letter, they're probably going to be saying glowing things about you, right? So in that regard, they typically don't add a lot, except that, as was already stated, they may start differentiating or helping explain things that were not necessarily clear, in some of the other parts of the application package. But then once you get your foot in the door, other things really are important. So you may come from a rock star lab, but you get up and you do your chalk talk and it's a disaster, So that's not really great, right?
Another thing, sorry, just to sort of
Yeah.
follow up on that, is another thing you can encourage your letter writers to explain is, a lot of people have taken on really challenging projects as postdocs, and it may take a couple of years to get the system up and running, and to the point where you can actually begin to produce papers. And that's very, very common. Whereas other people step right into something and they get a couple publications the first year because people had already done the legwork and it was ready to go. So I think having the letter writers explain, there may not be that many publications, but holy crap, this person really set up the system. I never thought anyone would succeed in this, and it's really going to pay dividends. That is that kind of explanation about the CD or whatever.
Yeah, then they can emphasize any other extenuating circumstances in the letter, whatever else happened in your life. I mean, things that might otherwise come across to a reader of your application, like, oh, what happened here? They can try to explain that and turn it into a positive.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, as we know, sometimes bad things happen, right? Like you get a PI who is not that supportive, not going to write you a letter, or they're just neutral, right? You have to move, you have to do a second postdoc. How do you frame that? Like if you're not
Second
gonna
postdocs are totally common. That's, how many of you are on your second postdoc? Just a couple. Well, there'll be more of you. I'm sorry, but this job market, it's just extremely common that the people who are eventually hired often have 2 postdocs under their belt.
I mean, I think you have to sort of frame it. I went on to this other lab to learn new skills, right? I mean, Molly and I both know some kind of toxic situations that have happened sometimes. And I don't think it does you well to sort of discuss the toxicity, because more likely than not, if the people know the lab that you came from, probably they have a reasonable idea of the toxicity, right? But, I mean, one way or another, bad things happen to good people, right? We all know that happens. And what makes the difference is when you take that next step, what is your attitude and how are you going to use that opportunity for your trajectory, right? And that's really what it's about. I mean, there's nothing you can do about what happened. Yes, exactly. But what you do is focus on yourself, focus on your future, and how that's going to help you. So I just think it doesn't really do any good to focus on kind of toxic situations.
Yeah, get out of the toxic situations as fast as you can. And you're never going to change that person.
Yes.
And if it's a postdoc advisor that's the idiot, your graduate advisor can explain all that in a letter. You don't have to do that. Just move on. Just get the hell out of Dodge and focus on stuff that will build your career in a positive way.
Kind of on that same note, are there certain things either in formatting or in writing that act as either red flags to a search committee or as irritants to a search committee? I don't know if there's particular things that either you personally or that you've observed the committee seem to not like, or see structurally or in Word that make them go, oh, this candidate doesn't sound that good to me because they did A, B, or C.
Search statements that are a big wall of text with no formatting and no white space and no figures and we're tired and
You need signposts, like you need to guide the gentle reader along. Take them by the hand and explain to them why you're so passionate about your science. And not, you should have technical stuff in there, but you're likely going to have a pretty broad search committee, and so you want to be able to pitch it both to your mom and to like the world's expert in the field, and they all have to come away really impressed. So it's that kind of. So start off with big themes, and then you can burrow down into the minutia. But have lots of signposts. Yeah, and let the passion come out. Don't write in a dry, passive voice. Write in an active voice that, where you're saying why you're doing the stuff you're doing.
That's different than paper.
Yeah, it's totally different from a paper writing.
Right, you're writing it to the third person. This is all first person. This is, I did this, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And especially for the people in the community that aren't reading every single word, it's useful to have like, this is the key point I want them to see in bold, those sorts of things, so that, if someone who's just quickly reading or skimming it will see that, they'll think, okay, maybe I'll read this paragraph because that sentence they made in bold is actually pretty striking, and I think I want to find out more about this.
And the bold sentences help you when you're trying to write a summary of what this person's research strategy is. I can just say, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm someone who puts like a bajillion exclamation points in their PowerPoints, and it drives people nuts. But I never am opposed to an exclamation point here and there in a research statement. Like, I worked all these, and then I discovered this.
It was so cool.
It was so cool. Yeah, let your personality come through. They need to see who you are. They don't want to have someone who is just a husk of a person.
You've talked about structuring your research plans somewhat like a grant, and to be sure that you're not just focusing on your past research successes and experiences. How much can you leverage unpublished research or results that are pretty much in their infancy? Just
do it early and often.
Great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Preliminary data section.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Just say, this is, I'm working on a manuscript, but this is a really exciting finding, and it really leads to this, and blah, blah, blah. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think mine was primarily unpublished stuff.
Right.
Finally got published in 2017, right? 5 years after I started.
Yeah.
Right, so it's, it's good to have that.
Yeah, it's really good to have that.
About the research statement, is there any risk that the ideas might be stolen, and are there any protections about it?
Y'all have to answer that. There's not much stealing in the biology department.
I guess we don't sign anything like we do for federal grants, but we say we're not going to, that things are kept confidential. But, I think the intent is that this is some of what you're supposed to keep confidential.
Yeah, I mean, you really hope that, the folks that are on the committee, are above board. I mean, my only sort of point to that is, why are you applying somewhere where you think someone might steal your work, right? I mean, so, and the only reason I say that is, when you're going out and you're applying, you don't want to be, the same person sitting beside you, right? You want to be able to distinguish yourself from that person. But yet, there may be themes, like Dennis mentioned, that kind of offer an opportunity for collaboration and synergy. But, I would personally, I would think twice about applying for a position where whatever your research statement is, someone could pick it up and lift it. Not so much because you're worried that they're going to do it, but that there's someone there with your exact set of skills. You know what I mean? So you should be different, but fit within the broader scope.
And if it's obvious that you're holding stuff back because you don't want people to know the details because you're worried about that, that probably sends the wrong message. I mean, how many of you have been to talks where there are folks in industry or whatever, and they say something incredibly frustratingly vague because you'd be shot if they actually told you the truth, and you don't want that kind of thing to come across. You want to be honest, straightforward, upfront, proud, not
I
holding
think in
back.
most cases, people also have plenty of things they want to do on their own. They don't really,
Yeah.
usually for really good ideas, you have to beat them over the head with before anyone wants to be listened to anyway. So,
Yeah, I think it would only be if they are a direct competitor in your field
Right.
that you feel like they could do that. I have a graduate student rotating in my lab who won't tell me the name of the gene that he worked on as an undergrad.
See, that's ridiculous.
But I know his former PI, and I understand why why he might be like that. But it's ridiculous not to tell like someone who's working on something completely different. He's not going to care.
It's sad. Sad.
Right, so that will work okay-ish for a graduate student. It will not work if you're interviewing for a faculty position and you tell one of your future colleagues, no, I can't share this gene name with
Right.
you. You won't be that position.
Who wants a colleague like that?
Yes, and that,
So, speaking of the urgency of the research, when I was writing my research statement, many times I felt that I'm exaggerating, I'm over-exaggerating, or isn't really, will it lead to any negative effect if they feel that I'm over-exaggerating my research? People advise me to start from a very big picture. For example, there is a huge energy consumption.
Yeah.
Okay, it is true, but I'm not solving all the problems.
They don't expect you to, but they want to see that you understand where it fits in the big picture. Right?
yeah, I think big and then narrow down.
Plus, hopefully you have previous publications, preliminary data to support what you're saying. If you're kind of promising the moon and the stars and there's nothing to sort of support, then that's a problem, but,
To a large extent, those big opening statements are pointing to the importance and potential for the field as a whole, right? You're saying this is an area where we urgently need to understand more about it or whatever because of this, this, and this. And then you can drill down and say, what I want to do is this aspect of it. You're not overselling what you want to do by pointing out the importance of the broader field at all. But it is showing them that you are not a narrow person. You're not like only interested in the exact, little detailed thing that you're working on, but rather you see how it fits in to the field as a whole. And that's really important when you're teaching, when you're talking to colleagues and communicating with folks outside of your own immediate area. So having that confidence to put your work in a larger context is, I think, really important. But you can always run it by people and say, is this overblown? And chances are they'll say no. And if anything, you've understated it.
I have a question regarding for the ones who did the PhD outside of the U.S. Probably, but outside of the U.S., the recommendation letters are not as flashy as they are in here.
Especially in England.
So I was wondering what to do in that case, if it's better to avoid the PhD advisor letter or...
Everyone knows this. Everyone on the search committee knows this. Yeah. It was adequate work. The student comported themselves Well. I'm married to someone from England, so.
So you guys talked a little bit about tailoring your application and your interview, I guess, to the search committee. At what point do you figure out who is on the search committee? Or is it kind of just a mystery until you get there?
Yeah, no, for none of them, I didn't know who was on the search committee for any of them. Sometimes the chair of the committee will tell you, you have dinner, right, and that will come out. But, you know, I would basically just look at, okay, who is in this department? Okay, I see these connections here. I'm going to emphasize that in this one, you know, 2-sentence blurb that's towards the end of my intro.
And or is it a interdepartmental hire, and then you want to address the strengths of your application to both, you know, or the 3 things. And so it's more at that level than the individual search group.
Yeah, I think you're customizing maybe 1 paragraph of your cover letter for each school. Everything else is probably the same for every application. It doesn't need to be changed. I don't think you really ever need to know who is on your search committee. You probably know your host, who's organizing your visit, but
yeah, I mean, the last paragraph could say, you know, bottom line is that I'm really excited about this position at blah, 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 because I see the potential for interacting with the folks who are doing this and the folks who are doing that, and, you know, so I'm eager to hear from you or something like that, I don't know. So again, convey enthusiasm about the place and the academic unit that you're applying to.
And so that's not considered too forward, like, oh, I really want to work with John on.
Well, doing like on an individual thing is kind of a bit weird, but just to say that, you know, this is a great department, there's some people, real strengths that, and this is why I'm applying to this job. You know, make them think that, you know, you saw this like, my dream job, and this fits perfectly with where I want to go, and you all will benefit from my interacting with you. You don't say it like that, but.
It's kind of a follow-up question to that, specifically for Dr. Ko. You mentioned doing 50 to 60 of these interviews, so I'm curious, logistically, how you keep track and structure tailoring even just a small part like a cover letter or a little slant from your research and teaching statement. And I mean, I did one of these, and I'm just keeping track of like who had published what that I might be able to interact with, or what other model organisms were available. Felt like it consumed a lot of energy for me. I can't imagine doing that for like 4 dozen or 5 dozen schools.
Yeah.
So do you have any strategy?
I used Excel, right? And so I had a row for each school, and then I had, okay, these are the things I emphasized before. So then if they, you know, if they do contact me back, I know, okay, I've already told them that I care about these things. So, right, you know, they don't come and say, oh, you said you like this stuff, and I'm like, no, right. You want to at least remember what you told them. So yeah, I just use Excel to keep it all down. It was a ton of work. But, you know, it was worth it, right? If you really want this sort of job, I felt like I need to tailor it for each place. And some people on these things even told me that, oh yeah, we really liked how you pointed this. I even got a phone call, like, I had sent in the application and I got a phone call like the next day from someone saying, yeah, you're right, you fit in really well because of this thing, right?
So especially for the ones that are your dream jobs, right?
Yeah.
Like if there are a bunch that, you know, you're not even sure you would go to, even if it was your only offer, you know, maybe don't bother with that, but yeah.
I don't know about doing 40 or 50, if that's a good recommendation. I don't know, would you do that again if you?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. And that sounds like a number that postdocs in my field apply to, which feels horrible to me, but that's why I'm curious about what the strategy for that is, because it seems to be that's what people do.
Right. But I mean, it doesn't take, you just look through the faculty, what are the ones that seem to connect, just based on, usually there's a list, right, that has, they work on this. It's not like I read every single one in detail. It's like, okay, there's the human geneticist, what do they actually work on? There's the one who works on salmonella, what do they work on? And then, right, I would just tailor those few sentences. Usually the intro paragraph I would tailor,
Yeah.
and then the,
Conclusion.
yeah.
Yeah, close
So,
up.
I don't know, in engineering, I usually recommend people apply to 12, 15 jobs. I wouldn't say more than 20. I know of a candidate that did apply to 40, 50, and then got 30 interviews, and then, was totally overwhelmed, like, what the heck do you do now?
So obviously, different fields have different job availabilities compared to the supply. Yeah, I mean, we just had a search in biology for molecular biology, broadly written. We were trying to get the best people, and we had over 300 applications, so.
Yeah. I tried to only apply to 12 the first year. I got 0 interviews, so what else was I going to do?
I was hoping maybe you could comment on what you do in your research versus what your PhD is in. And I mean, because graduate school has obviously become a very kind of interdisciplinary, and you could maybe provide some solutions from a research perspective to a given department that's not your PhD, but you might not necessarily be able to teach freshman biology, for example, and how that kind of interplay comes into effect.
Well, let's just say the older you get, the less relevant your PhD research was to what you're currently doing. So really, like, the goal is to grow and to stretch and to try new things and learn new things. And so your expertise is going to change all the time, right? So it may be that you're applying to a department that has nothing to do with what you did for a PhD, but your postdoc training has really set you up for that. So I wouldn't say there's any hard, fast rule about what departments or what programs you apply to based on what your PhD is in, or what you're going to teach if you're at a arts and sciences department. It's going to be based on your current passion and expertise, and that could be very different from your PhD. When I got my PhD, the big discovery was PCR. A PhD might be sequencing one gene.
Yeah, so my PhD is in developmental biology, and then I did my postdoc in a bacterial pathogenesis lab, but I do mainly human genetics now, right? So, and I applied for some positions that were more computational, but I knew that I'm not qualified to teach Bayesian statistics and things like that. But that just sort of becomes apparent when you in interviews and stuff like that. And I got a call from the chair of the UC Berkeley search again, where I said, I am not the guy who's going to do those things. And there's like, that's perfectly fine. We're looking for someone who's more just bridging these two departments. So you'll have to know, right, if someone like me who's had experience in lots of different fields, if you actually want to have that job. Right, if they say specifically you're going to be teaching these classes in statistics and you feel you're not qualified to do it, don't apply for that job. But I felt like after talking to that person, it's like, okay, yeah, I can do what they want there. And same thing here. This was the search here that I got hired by was between medicine and human genetics, right? So I felt like, okay, yeah, I can bridge that stuff.
You can fit into a lot of different departments, and as long as you feel like you could teach 1 or 2 courses in that department, you don't have to be able to teach all of them. It doesn't have to even be your background, your grad work, your undergrad could have been in different departments. As long as you feel like you can do something. People will usually fit you into the right courses, if it makes sense with your expertise. They won't ask you usually to teach stuff that's totally outside of your background.
Yeah, I never thought I would teach intro bio, until I went to University of Oregon, and I was assigned to teach with Frank Stahl of Messelson and Stahl, and we taught intro bio, and he basically taught me how to teach intro bio. It was the most intimidating experience of my life.
Questions? Matt?
So kind of going back to the numbers game, it sounds like you apply to a lot of places and most of them don't end up being successful. And so I was wondering if you know, if it's appropriate and if it's okay to take it as a growing experience and ask for feedback from committees. I mean, obviously search committees are reading a lot of applications, but how do you grow from the failures to ultimately getting it done?
I think it's reasonable to ask for feedback after interviews. I don't know about if you didn't get invited for interviews, since there's usually 300 applications, and you might not have a lot.
I mean, I guess the only way to do that is if there's a buddy of your advisor on the search committee or something like that, so they could get inside scoop for you. But I don't think anyone would reply, honestly, because they just get overwhelmed. I mean, you've got this huge pile, well, on your computer, this huge pile of applications, and they're not necessarily going to remember, and it's going to take a lot of work to go back and dig through and then remind themselves what it was about your application that didn't get them super excited. So, yeah.
But I also think, I mean, Dennis shared some of his experiences. So if you are invited for an interview, odds are you probably already know, right? Dennis said he didn't feel particularly well about some of the interactions he had on one of his interviews. And so I think, you know, you probably will know that. You know, and again, I agree that, you know, if you didn't make it to the interview, it's really going to be tough to get any feedback just because a lot of these search committees are just overwhelmed.
One thing that I did do for just the couple that I like really wanted this particular position, and I got invited back for a second interview, but then I looked a couple months later to see who they actually hired, right? And I could say, okay, yeah, I could see that they might be a better fit for these reasons or whatever like that. I forgot the other thought that I had.
You know, and it's also, okay, I struck out on all my first interviews, and, you know, but I didn't get a job the first time around, but I was able to ask the host, you know, do you have any feedback, and they give me a little bit of useful feedback, and then apply it again. Maybe some of that you can do either up front or afterwards with your written materials. You can ask not just your advisor, but other mentors, other people you can ask for feedback that have a little bit of connection to your field, but don't have to be world experts in your specific sub-discipline. If you can get some of that in advance, you might get a chance if you can circulate your materials widely and get any feedback from anyone, you know, sort of up front, and you'll save yourself some of that time.
And for me, what really helped was just applying more widely. The first year I just applied on the West Coast. And the second thing, right, is that I got this K award funded. I didn't change very much at all in terms of anything else. I mean, I crafted things a bit better. A few people read it, but I didn't get any feedback from the places that turned me down the first year.
When is it appropriate, or is it appropriate to let the search committee know that your significant other is also on the job market? Do you bring that up in the cover letter, or you just?
I think at the interview stage, you know, people let that out during dinners or other discussions. So.
People will try to ask that in a cagey way. Is there anyone else we should know about? Because we can't actually ask that, but it is very important to know. I mean, because then we can start to set wheels in motion to start recruiting your significant other, or at least finding them a fit somewhere, especially if it's in an academic environment. We can at least refer them to, point them out to other departments that may be looking at their application materials.
I wouldn't put it at the application itself. I would just see how things pan out, and then at interview stage or second visit, or, well, preferably before the second visit. Yeah.
What happens if both partners can't fit in the same application? Like, should both apply?
You mean if a given job is a good fit for both?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely apply.
Yeah.
Everyone apply. Because it's, especially if it's not a private institution, you know, there's a chance that they could make two positions, right? If they go to the dean and argue, oh, you know, person's significant other, also a very good fit, would be very complementary to the department. They could make a second position, and then it wouldn't be any issue hiring because the application is already there in the job pool. Even the search has been closed, but it's a much more difficult problem if the application wasn't there to begin with.
Do you have tips for those of us with limited actual classroom course teaching? And is it more advantageous to say that you can build upon an existing course, or should you come up with ideas of like, oh, I can start a new course that your program lacks?
Most people don't have classroom experience, right? They've been TAs.
How about if you trained in a medical school, so that really wasn't even an option?
Well, you can point to your experience in giving talks to large audiences at meetings, and at small meetings you could talk about seminar type experience, but I would talk mainly about your passion about the subject and conveying that to the students and using your own knowledge and your own enthusiasm to teach these subjects. And yeah, I mean, you want to see sort of just say that you love to teach in these different areas and you're excited about building, and say, obviously I haven't done this before, but I'm confident that with mentoring and all of that stuff, and I'm eager to work with the academic resource, whatever it is, to, like here at Duke, there's all sorts of support for mentoring teaching. So.
Can you volunteer? Can you volunteer to guest lecture if you can, if you know somebody who's teaching a course that's relevant?
Yeah.
People love guest lectures. I love guest lectures.
Ask your advice. Yeah.
And for mine, I had a friend who was a fellow postdoc who was teaching at a community college, and she was very happy to let me guest lecture in her community college thing, and yeah, that was the only teaching experience I listed.
I mean, there is, so if you're too, well, I don't know, so I know at the graduate level here at Duke, there's a teaching certificate program. Do you know about that, Molly?
Yep, and so that's for graduate students.
Right, is there something equivalent for postdocs?
Yeah, postdocs can apply for preparing future faculty. They can also go to the teaching ideas lecture workshop series. And everybody on the postdoc list, did you get the list of teaching resources I sent out a couple of weeks ago? If you didn't, just email me and I'll send it to you. But yes, like you were saying, like Durham Tech literally teaches 1,000 classes a week. So they are often happy to have people come in and do guest lectures. Very broad fields, so it's like the science department. It's not, MGM, right? But so, so that's a good opportunity for people. They're not going to pay you very well or at all, but yeah. William?
So you guys, we hear from this side, we hear a lot of the numbers of how many people apply. So 300, 150 applicants every year, and obviously that's a lot. And like you said, the field's flooded, and it's the problem. But of those 300, of those 150, how many actually were good? Like how many had incomplete? Like what percentage of 300 weren't even considered because they were missing something? Like what were the actual applications that you had to actually look through and be like, oh, these are the good stuff?
So I have to say that, it's very common for letters to be missing and stuff like that, but at least the search committees I've been on, that has never been a reason for ruling out an application. If it's someone we were excited about, we would just reach out to that letter writer. So that's not why they're dropped. They're dropped, usually there's like a triage thing to find people who are good fits for the job itself, and that'll, reduce it by 50%, 75%, something like that. So, I think, were you mentioning being on a search where there were the chair or someone was on the search and they went through and did a first cut? So often, the people who are running the search, maybe 2 or 3 people will go through, but then I think it's really important, as you were saying, for the other committee members to dig back down in the so-called reject pile and bring people up who might have been, fallen through the cracks. But yeah, I mean, certainly we weren't agonizing over hundreds, right? And that's because a lot of people apply to a lot of jobs, and they may not be a perfect fit, you know, and so.
Yeah, we get some applicants that don't even have PhDs, and you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it comes down to, you know, the top 20 or 30 people, and that's where it really gets, you know, in terms of the fit to the job, and they look promising. So 20 or 30 people, I would say, is that more or less what you guys?
Yeah, right, and I don't think there are many like terrible applications.
No, not
right?
at all.
Maybe like 10 out of the 150 or
Right.
or right. But yeah, there's probably a top group of maybe 30, which then, but then we just winnowed that down to the 8 we invited for interviews.
Yeah.
And then again, one of those was pulled up from the lower group. So, yeah.
And now the deans are, you know, at least at Arts and Sciences, I don't know about the medical center side of things, but the deans go through every search, and so, you know, you get to a short list or a semi-short list or something like that prior to the interview list.
Mm-hmm.
And the deans then go through the rest of the applicants that didn't make that cut and will hand-pick ones that they think possibly were overlooked and ask, why didn't you consider this? Why didn't you consider that? Why didn't you? So there's a much more, and again, that's because to avoid the old boy network and all of that kind of stuff. So that's a good thing.
How much do you consider, like, network friends of friends? So if there was an applicant that one of your colleagues in the department was talking about, does that kind of bump their application up? And to that sense, is it worth then reaching out to potential colleagues when you're applying to their university?
I mean, it certainly helps if people on the committee have seen you give talks at meetings and things like that, and that you have meetings and they're already impressed by your research.
And if they're not on the search committee, but they're in the department, they could convey
that's
that
true.
information to the search committee.
Right, yeah, we've had that come up in faculty meeting, like, you know, someone will say a few words about why they think a certain person applied, we should take a closer look at. Things like that.
Yeah.
That said, I didn't know anyone at any place that I applied to.
I mean, my sense is what you're sort of describing, you know, like I have a colleague recently that moved to Boston. He was in Michigan, and, you know, one of the more senior folks at the institution in Boston knew him, knew his work, you know, and that was just a direct pull, you know. And so I think those kinds of things happen really kind of independent of kind of the broader searches. You know, that's when those connections really matter. You know, that there's someone who's the chair, you know, of a particular department. They really know you, they may even collaborate with you, you know, and they see an opportunity to pull you. So those things, I think, sometimes happen really very kind of independent when you guys sort of agree.
Yeah, the process for senior hires is totally different.
Yeah, totally different.
Hi, for someone who's interested in pursuing a research career, what do you think is rewarding to sit on, say, undergrad this honors this here, like I do?
You're asking, is it rewarding?
Yeah, for the the future career to sit on.
You mean if you
as a committee member?
So you mean if you, as a postdoc or something like that, you were involved in this honors research, and then you wanted to put that on your application, you're wondering how that would look to the search committee?
Yeah.
Oh, mentoring is very, very important, right? So everyone you mentor, you should mention and say, you know, what you got out of, what they got out of it, if they've gone on to grad school or med school or something like that, definitely, that's a big deal, right? So, yeah, it's one-on-one teaching, it's one-on-one mentoring, and So that's something that you'll be doing your whole life, right? So.
You have to list if you're mentoring undergrads or grad students, depending on your CV.
Definitely.
So what do you consider as a short postdoc versus a long postdoc? And do you think a long postdoc is a negative thing that the search committee would consider?
I think it comes down to, John had mentioned this earlier, right? If you had a system that took a long time to develop, that's perfectly fine. I mean, my postdoc was 6 years. On the other hand, we've had people who have postdocs of 3 years, but they've been super productive over a shorter period of time. So it just varies.
It just varies. And that's also where, we keep on going back to the letters and explaining things.
Yeah.
And you can explain things in your statement too. Something like that, you could say, I've been a postdoc for 6 years at this place, and while that may seem long to you, it's, you could, whatever, you could say things like that, right? In a cover letter or whatever, and you could say it may seem like a long postdoc to you, but really, I started from ground zero, building this system, and it's to the point now where it's really going to pay off in my independent research career. So, we've hired lots of people with long postdocs. Lots of people with 2 postdocs, 3 postdocs.
I've seen that most people, at least in my field, that are being hired as assistant professors mostly come from the top 10 or top 15 ranked universities. So what's the weight that the university has to make the shortcut, to make the last shortcut, to, let's say, from going from 30 to, let's say, the last 10 people or the 6 people?
I would hope it would have nothing to do with going from the top 30 to the top 10, but I will admit it could very well have something to do with getting to the top 30. And I'm hoping that that goes away in the future, right? Because again, that can be so much of a old boy network kind of thing. I mean, we all know how competitive the job market is. So there are outstanding people being hired by universities other than the top 10, and they're going to be outstanding advisors to graduate students and postdocs, and those folks will be doing outstanding research even though they didn't come from Harvard, yeah, hopefully that becomes less and less of an issue. I don't think that I'm personally very much opposed to putting any weight at all on that kind of stuff.
Is there any difference how you prepare your application for a tier 1 school or a tier 2 school, and especially if you're in a very focused research area where very few schools are available to conduct your research? How do you tailor that for different tier schools and different aspects in that regard? Like a tier 1 school or a tier 2 school, is there a way that you have to differentiate your application material?
I think if they're both research institutions, there's the same, you do the same application. You're going to be a superstar at a tier 1 or a tier 2. They still want superstars at tier 2 research universities. And this is a teaching university primarily, then it's a different application.
Yeah, are you saying that at some universities you would be unable to do the research that you wanted to do?
Yeah.
But you wanted to apply to it anyway because you are interested in, why would you be, is it because you wouldn't?
No, I'm just saying, trying to understand if the application material, how you prepare, is different at, in tier 1 you might have to have really a lot of research emphasis on a very specific area, but if you are in a tier 2 school, it might be more of less research emphasis and more of teaching emphasis, and then how do you really balance that application material, how you prepare that?
So, yeah, I think, let's say Williams College is a primarily teaching college, right? But it's, one of the best colleges in the world, right? They want people who are doing outstanding research, even if they don't necessarily have the lab, whatever. You go to Reed College or whatever it is, a place that doesn't have the research that you're doing, they're still going to want a superstar researcher, right? So you don't want to like talk down to a tier 2. Now, if it's the case that there's no way you could do your research at this institution, then you need to explain why you still want to be considered as a faculty member there and what you would do in lieu of your particular area of research. If it's a pure teaching place, then you would shift your application to be, you know, I've been research, but I want to take that passion and, you know, be really influential as a STEM educator or something like that.
I mean, I think it goes back to sort of Dennis talking about his Excel file, right? Keeping track of everything. I mean, you really, much like you are currently conducting your own research, you have to approach the job search in that way as well, right? I mean, you know, my question would be, I mean, if you can't do the research that you want to do, why are you applying to this particular school? You know, you need to know and learn and research every institution that you're going to apply to. And you need to really think about from a very objective, kind of critical perspective, you know, can I conduct my career at this institution? I mean, if you can't, then you shouldn't apply, you know.
So we've reached the end of our time. Today's theme was upward trajectory, right? So let's thank our panel.